I covered in detail the slide of comics in the 80s and the 90s into an enormous business empire, with Marvel especially emerging as a market force, but frequently making huge mistakes for no reason other than naked avarice. It would, in the end, lead to bankruptcy and the near liquidation of their beloved universe. The film juggernaut of the last dozen years would put to shame any of the aspirations that they had at this time, though, thanks to a lot of bad licensing decisions. However, one thing they did manage to do successfully was move two of their products from the comic pages and into animation, the X-Men, and later on, Spider-Man. Margaret Loesch at Fox was a big advocate for the X-Men series, and despite big problems with ACOM, no surprise for anyone familiar with their work on the original Transformers series, the show was still a massive hit. With the success of this, Saban, who was producing the X-Men series, was later in a position to advance what they would be most famous for, Mighty Morphin Power Rangers. With the X-Men series riding high, the Spider-Man series was developed, effectively, in-house. To get into all the stuff that happened would probably be enough for another chapter of my comic history, so I won't get into it. Suffice to say that Avi Arad, co-owner of Toy Biz, with Ike Perlmutter, the pair who would one day take over the parent company, well, he was in charge of the Marvel side. Arad was a believer in the Marvel Universe characters, but unfortunately he didn't seem to have much respect for the animated works. Reports suggest that he viewed the animated series as nothing more than a means to push merchandising, as Toy Biz had the exclusive right to produce Marvel toys. This led to friction with John Semper Jr., who had been brought in by Stan Lee to helm the series, and worked to integrate the long history of the comic book character into the show itself. This would even include some shocking appearances for a Saturday morning cartoon, like The Punisher, or Morbius the Living Vampire. The latter was particularly hilarious in its execution because the network censors refused to allow Morbius to mention blood. What makes this hilarious, besides the fact that even small children know what vampires do, the theme song for the show mentions blood. A lot. Not like the original 60s one, which mentions it in passing. No. Keep track of the mention of the word blood. Ready? Spider blood, radioactive spider blood, radioactive spider blood. If that was a drinking game, you couldn't even drink that fast every time the word blood showed up. The show even included Venom, who was extremely popular as the nemesis of Spider-Man in this period, and he was brought into the show rather early. Now, the origin of it had to be changed, of course, because the symbiote was brought back from space in the cartoon rather than the way it was in the comic book. But it couldn't be done that way. It had been picked up in the middle of the Secret Wars event on the Beyonder planet, while fighting Doctor Doom and dealing with villains while Spidey teamed up with the Marvel superheroes. I mean, there's just no way that you could do anything like that. Not a chance. Anyway, our episode picks up after the story arc called Secret Wars, when on the Beyonder planet, fighting Doctor Doom and dealing with villains, Spidey teamed up with the Marvel superheroes. Shut up. The context for Secret Wars was that Madam Web had brought Spider-Man to the Beyonder, who created the event for that 3-part story, but finished it by saying that it had all been a test for Spider-Man himself, to see if he was leader material in order to deal with a much greater crisis. Which brings us to this episode. I really, really hate clones. A rather common sentiment around Spider-Man, I'd say. The episode begins with the Beyonder dropping Spider-Man off in a Manhattan that is burning. Could have been stopped, but they just didn't have enough large plastic cups to put out the fires. Spidey is a bit put off to see all of New York devastated, and makes his feeling obvious when the Beyonder finally shows up. Only to be told that, actually, you're the asshole here. But it doesn't seem that way when the Hobgoblin and Green Goblin fly by bombing the place just for shits and grins on their way to the Daily Bugle. Well, they call it J3 Communications. Either way, it's where J. Jonah Jameson is broadcasting about the state of the city. Spoiler alert, bad.
Sorry, this program is cancelled due to low ratings. Huh? There was no one left in the city to listen.
I like this joke-cracking thing. Maybe I should give up the goblin thing and become an evil clown instead. What do you think, Greenie? They want the microwave transmitter, which they can't get without Jameson's cooperation, which they think they can get by throwing Robbie out of the window. In a sense, they can. Spidey saves him, but his first act on reaching the ground is to try to punch Spider-Man in the face. It seemed like such a friendly mask, too. Seems that the goblins work for Spider-Man, which is why his arrival confuses the hell out of them until they realize that he's an imposter. Looks like we're dealing with a parallel reality here, where this Spider-Man is not about being friendly in the neighborhood. This is why Boom Boom Barbie was recalled by Mattel. Spider-Man rescues Jonah. He had been pitched off once his handprint had been used to unlock the microwave dish. But that's when Spider-Man's evil doppelganger shows up.
I wondered when you turned up again, dear clone.
Oh boy, worse than a mirror fight is when your doppelganger gets an upgrade. Looks like this one is using one of the alien symbiotes. Oh, and not just any of them. No. He's got Carnage, whose name should make clear that it is not one of the nice ones. Carnage exists because in the 90s, the evil reflection, I want to eat your brain lunatic killer Venom showed up, and the response was, I thought you were going to give us a real villain here.